with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, December 19th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Luke Savage joins us to talk about Trudeau losing his grip on power in Canada. And later in the show, Jeff Stein of the Washington Post will be with us to talk about U.S. sanctions in his series, The Money War. Also on the program today, Republican dysfunction is already starting. President Elon Musk whips up opposition to the government funding deal, and Vice President Trump obliges. This puts Mike Johnson's leadership in peril as Republicans scurry away from this continuing resolution due to Musk's threats to primary anyone who votes for it. Johnson has no choice, though. It's being sent to the House Rules Committee today. The deadline for funding the government is Friday. An appeals court panel disqualifies Fani Willis from prosecuting Trump in the Georgia RICO case. The Wall Street Journal publishes a bombshell report with over 50 sources detailing how Biden's close staff hid his mental decline all the way back to 2019. Malpractice. Pete Hegseth's confirmation hearing is scheduled for January 14th. Senators request the FBI background check on Hegseth, a rare move. The Teamsters launched the largest strike against Amazon yet this morning at hundreds of facilities less than a week before Christmas. The Supreme Court agrees to consider a case about whether South Carolina can kill Medicaid funding for all Planned Parenthood facilities and care because they also provide abortions. Yesterday, Israel killed dozens, striking schools turned into shelters in Gaza, and pounding Yemen with bombs. The Greater Israel Project continues. Human Rights Watch joins Amnesty International, accusing Israel of genocide. 3 of the 30 remaining prisoners in Guantanamo Bay have been repatriated to their home countries. And lastly, the CDC confirms the first severe case of bird flu in the United States. I think it's in Louisiana. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It is an EmMajority Report Thursday. Hello to Bradley. Hello to Matt. Why don't you say hello while I take a sip of my water?
Hello, Emma. Happy last EmMajority Thursday.
Oh, yeah.
2024.
Yes, that is the last live one, although we will be having our famous Best of series, and there will be an EmMajority Report Thursday edition version.
Sam did the exact correction of me yesterday.
Oh, well.
It's the last live one, but
slowly we meld into the same person.
I'll say what I said yesterday is I'll not be here, so it's the last one for me.
Yeah. Good point. The break will be good. It'll be a good opportunity to reset as we head into the new year, where what we're going to be trying to do is exploit cracks in the Republican Party and in the administration. Right now, we're seeing a little bit of that dysfunction manifest, and Donald Trump is not president yet. Apparently, he's kind of in the running more for vice president, though. I saw Adam Kinzinger say this on TV. Unfortunately, you got to hand it to him here. It's a little clever. Calling Trump vice president and calling Elon Musk president that might be a good way to get to Donald Trump's ego and cause dysfunction between the two men, which is something I think that I would like to see. But for right now, he seems joined at the hip with Elon Musk, who, as a reminder, is the richest person on the planet. So Trump does need him to a degree, especially the threats that mob enforcer Elon Musk is able to back up, which is that if you don't go with everything I say and you don't abide by my wishes, we are going to use Elon Musk's vast fortune to primary you. And oddly, you had Donald Trump this morning saying that we should abolish the debt ceiling. We have this tweet. It makes no sense. Like, his mind is gone, and then also there's just no ideological consistency. He told NBC News that he doesn't want to just lift the debt ceiling. He's keen to get rid of it, saying, quote, "The Democrats have said they want to get rid of it. If they want to get rid of it, I would lead the charge." I'm not sure if that's true. I don't think that's going to happen, but
I'm sorry. I know
that
there's
would
a
be
lot
great.
of people that don't want any sort of like yes ending of the president, and I accept like the caution on that. But when he says stuff like that, it is time to say, okay, yes, get rid of this stupid thing, and let's never have to deal with this crap again.
Elizabeth Warren was saying, hey, I agree with this. We can work on this. But it's a little bit in conflict with the stated purpose of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, a joke that was tired like 6 years ago or something, reinvigorated by the least funny or charismatic man on the planet, Elon Musk. Because at the same time, they're supposed to be cutting everything for supposed efficiency. That's what makes no sense here. Here's Elon Musk's post on Twitter threatening anybody who votes for the continuing resolution that would keep the government open through March, because it includes around $100 billion for natural disaster relief funding. And that's what they're all upset about. Even though Donald Trump is at the same time saying that we should abolish the debt ceiling, it makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
But as I said earlier, it seems like Mike Johnson's in a bit of a pickle because the deadline is Friday for government funding. So he's going to have to send this to the House Rules Committee. Now, Chip Roy is on the House Rules Committee, and here he is, I guess yesterday, on Glenn Beck's program talking about the continuing resolution and how it runs afoul of our stated purpose, which is DOGE.
This is the problem, right? You've got, and to back up, because we can go through one by one, but the real issue here that's being exposed, you saw Elon tweeted out last night about this, because this bill is contrary to the very existence of DOGE. But keep in mind, remember 2 weeks ago when Elon and Vivek came in to address the conference, you've got all of these Republicans flocking to the microphone to basically kiss the feet and kiss the ring and say, oh, thank you. Thanks for being here. Oh, you're so great. You've got people who are no champions of conservatism who are joining DOGE caucuses and going out and saying, I'm going to be the leader on DOGE. Why? Because they know the American people are sick of all the garbage and they want cover. They want to hide. But here's the thing. The emperor has no clothes. There's nowhere to hide. You've got a bill like this that honestly, for whatever you want to say about the speaker and any disappointment about what we're dealing with, and there's plenty to discuss as we go through all this, it is also a reflection of the conference itself, okay? Mm-hmm. In other words, when I went in front of the conference that day, 2 weeks ago, when Vivek and Elon were here, and I said at the microphone, I said, guys, I'm glad you're here. We need to empower the president with empowerment so he can cut spending. I think it's constitutional to do so. Vivek agreed. We're all talking about it. But I said, here's the thing. You guys, all of the people here at the mic, you guys have been, you, Elon, Vivek, you're looking for the problem, you're looking for the enemy, and it's right here in front of you.
Okay.
Wow,
says Glenn Beck. So who's kissing the ring here, Chip Roy? Because this is a very, very standard continuing resolution, and given the margins that Mike Johnson is operating with, especially because Donald Trump has appointed multiple Republican members of the House to his committees, like, they're going to be basically with a 2-vote majority until April. You're screwed if you don't pass this continuing resolution, because the Democrats, it doesn't seem like, thankfully, they're going to agree to this as of right now. But you're the one doing the sucking up by even giving credibility to this non-government agency that has not been confirmed by Congress and is essentially two rich guys calling the shots. And we're supposed to say that this is democratic and populist and responsive to the people. It's just handing our government over to the richest guy on the planet. And frankly, I think it's a bit clarifying. The people that are sucking up include someone like Rand Paul. This is what he tweeted the other day. Bradley. Rand Paul. The Speaker of the House need not be a member of Congress. Nothing would disrupt the swamp more than electing Elon Musk. Think about it. Yeah. Nothing's impossible, not to mention the joy at seeing the collective establishment, aka Uniparty, lose their ever-loving minds. Oh yeah, Rand Paul, fighting for the people of Kentucky by making the wealthiest man on the planet the Speaker of the House. Honestly, go for it.
Yeah, do it. We can dispense once and for all that these people are any kind of this richest man in the world who's a giant government contractor. Also works alongside other foreign governments and pulls certain punches on, say, free speech to do so. Let's see him, just be in charge of the House of Representatives.
It is. I mean, honestly, he is one of the biggest government contractors. He receives money from the federal government. Tesla, he made his fortune with the benefit of having
$1 billion loan
subsidies from the federal government, and now with his other ventures, he is heavily subsidized by the federal government. So for them to come in and talk about efficiency, give me a break. I can guarantee you that whatever they cut or are trying to cut doesn't do anything except enrich the people that are involved here. And it's on your backs. It's your taxpayer money that is going towards these freaks. And then the stuff that they're going to cut is going to be what helps people. So they're all up in arms and trying to shut down the government over $100 billion, which is really nothing when you look at the government budget, to help people who were victimized by disasters.
And I want to make one thing. Elon, he was tweeting like a manic person yesterday about this. Tweeted about Congress having a pay raise. Shut up about Congress getting more pay from public sources than private, okay?
Oh, yeah.
There's people that like to think about this. Ooh, maybe we shouldn't pay Congress more. And I understand because I hate Congress. You have to look at these the way that a billionaire like Elon Musk looks at it, which is the more that they get from their function as civil servants, the less that the donor money matters and the revolving door stuff matters. This is just, and I see people being like, well, I don't know. Billionaires know, okay? History knows. LBJ in the Robert Carroll books, that was a thing. It's not only does congressional representatives need more pay, their staffers do. They need more money to pay staffers.
Yeah.
So that those staffers don't need to look to private industry. So anytime they need a pay raise, I think it's fine.
Let's double the pay of members of Congress and senators. I'm not even joking.
Texas has this issue where it's like they only meet so many times. The pay is extremely low. So if you want to be a teacher and actually you can't afford it. You need to be a rich person to do it. So people just think about it in a broader sense than just your initial knee-jerk reaction to what Congress people deserve, and think about why the richest man in the world doesn't want them to have a pay raise. It's because he wants them to be more
more leverage
exactly.
over them.
Yeah, and Jared Golden, who's a Democrat from Maine, one of the most conservative Democrats in the country, he specifically was like, I don't support the continuing resolution because of the pay raise, and it's like. That's as Matt's saying. That's literally
because I got sugar daddies.
Right. That's a sop to being like, there should be an income floor basically, or ceiling basically, because I want to be more be able to be captured by rich people than if I could actually just have an independent income as just a legislator.
That's the aesthetic of right-wing populism for you. It's pretending like they're delivering for you when in fact they're actually making it easier for private interests to have a hold on our government. And hopefully we can have some communicators on the Democratic side make that clear, but did we have a big thing that happened earlier this week?
He was president for 4 terms, FDR.
One of our best communicators just lost a leadership vote because an octogenarian named Nancy Pelosi put her thumb on the scales once again. Anyway, with that said, a word from our sponsors. Holidays right around the corner, folks. And if you need a gift, you got to look to Shopify, which is where I look for their great checkout services. It's really easy. And if you're a business yourself and you're looking towards the future next year, look no further than where to sell your merch than through Shopify. When you think about businesses that they're selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does better selling than Shopify. It is the home of the #1 checkout on the planet and the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts getting abandoned and way more sales going ka-ching. So if you're growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell whatever your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web, in your store, in the feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. They make it extremely easy to check out. You just have your information ready, and if you see a product and you'd like to purchase it, you can do so through Shopify. And if you're a business, isn't that what you want, to make it as easy as possible for people to purchase your products? Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Aloe, Allbirds, and Skims uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/majority, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/majority to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/majority. This is where we sell our merch. We trust Shopify, and you should too. Shopify.com/majority. And lastly, if you were born after 1970, there's a very good chance that your first razor was a multi-blade razor. These razors have been the status quo for over half a century, and where has that gotten us? Not far. According to a recent study, 2/3 of men expect some irritation when they shave. There's virtually no information onto how to prevent irritation, only how to treat it, which means you're getting another product, probably from the same company that's selling you those multi-blade razors. Over 2 billion plastic razors enter the landfill each year in the United States alone. The razor and razor blade model leads to high operating costs. More and more people are opting to either stop shaving or explore more invasive hair removal methods. But this is why Hensen Shaving wants to change the shaving industry. Not through gimmicks like subscriptions or moisturizing strips, but through groundbreaking research on the impact shaving has on your skin. Here is the dirty secret about the razor industry. Even the cheapest dollar store disposable razor will likely give you a reasonably smooth shave. The trick in removing the hair without any negative outcomes to your skin is what Hensen has here. It's about changing the paradigm away from getting a smooth shave to getting a skin-friendly shave. When Hensen looked at other razors, they noticed the consistent lack of blade support. Basically, the blades have too much bend or flex or wobble, and that creates irritation. Hensen's razors are designed to hold the blades so that there is less bend and less wobble. Hensen makes their razors in their aerospace machine shop in Canada that also made parts for the Mars rover and the International Space Station. Hensen's machinists are exceptional at manufacturing, and that level of precision is one of the big reasons their razor is so much gentler on your skin. They have made it so the blade extends only 0.0013 inches past the shave plane of the razor, which is less than the thickness of a human hair. Matt, show off your Hensen razor shave.
I shaved Hensen this morning.
Looking very smooth. It really is. I got it as a gift for my dad. My fiance uses it. It's like... also a cost saver, which is the most incredible
That's what
part.
I care about. I get a big stack of actual razor blades, and I don't need to get a package in the mail every month with like 2 things in it. Like it's just so much better. I never have to. I probably won't even deal with Hensen again for another like multiple years.
Right, because you have they send you a large pack of blades, and they're creating the not just the best razor, but like the best razor company in terms of what the burden on the person doing the shaving. The Hensen razor works with stand dual-edged blades that cost less than 10 cents each. Once you own a Hensen razor, it's only about $3 to $5 per year to replace the blades. The razor itself is made of aluminum, and there is no plastic and no plastic also in Hensen's packaging. So can't say, I mean, we've had viewers write in and say how much they love the Hensen razor too. It really is a phenomenal product. It's time to say no to subscriptions and yes to a razor that will last you a lifetime. Visit hensenshaving.com/Sam to pick the razor for you and add code SAM to get a free shave cream with your razor. Just make sure to add it to your cart. That's hensonshaving.com/Sam to pick up the razor for you and use code SAM to get a free shave cream with your razor. Add it to your cart when you check out. That's HENSON shaving.com/Sam. All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we'll be talking to Luke Savage. We are back, and we are joined now by Luke Savage, writer in Toronto, whose work you can read in The Atlantic, The Guardian, The New Statesman, and more, including at Jacobin, where Luke is the columnist. Luke, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. So obviously, major political news in Canada right now, an upheaval. Trudeau is facing calls for his resignation. His finance minister, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, who was previously a pretty staunch ally of his, resigned earlier this week. And this, at least in terms of how the media is covering it, really centers around Trump's tariff threats, at least on its face. But if you could give people a broader context into the kind of, I guess, abandoning of Trudeau from his own allies this week.
Sure. I mean, the first thing I'd say about that is that I think the Trump tariff threat is really less the cause of Chrystia Freeland's resignation and the sort of chaos we're seeing in the government right now than, it's more the occasion for those things than the cause. The government has been unpopular for quite some time. Trudeau himself is personally very unpopular. The government has suffered a number of pretty significant by-election defeats, beginning with one in the summer in which they lost a seat in downtown Toronto that was kind of considered unlosable. They actually lost another one by over 30 points on Monday night. So the same day of Chrystia Freeland's resignation, the Liberals lost a by-election in British Columbia. And there have been a whole bunch of other cabinet ministers that have left over the last little while, lots of MPs saying they're not running for re-election, that kind of thing. There have been a number of, I wouldn't call them attempts to oust Trudeau, but there have been, instances of 20 or so Liberal MPs signing onto letters calling for him to go or asking him to reflect, that sort of thing. So all of this is really, I think, the culmination of a process that's been going on for some time. And, Freeland's resignation, I think, is really just a sign that anybody that has significant political ambitions of their own, as she obviously does, the opportunity cost of remaining in the government at this point and continuing to be associated with Trudeau is just too high.
And in terms of his lack of political capital, let's compare here. This was in late November 30th. Trudeau flew down to Mar-a-Lago to break bread with Donald Trump. This photo obviously went everywhere. Trump feeling like a kingmaker, whatever. And then compare that to this response from Claudia Sheinbaum, the other North American subject of these tariff threats, who said this a few days earlier. 70% of the illegal weapons seized from criminals in Mexico come from your country. We do not produce these weapons, nor do we consume synthetic drugs. Tragically, it is our country that lives are lost to the violence resulting from meeting the drug demand in yours. So compare that to Trudeau going down and kissing the ring. Obviously Morena and Sheinbaum are just significantly more popular in Mexico, and we can talk about why that is. They're actually delivering for people, as did AMLO. But the difference in their political standing and the fact, in my view, that Mexico is much more likely to actually be the subject of tariffs than Canada is because of the jingoism involved, just shows how weak Trudeau looks in this current moment compared to, and how weak, honestly, his political position is compared to Sheinbaum down in Mexico.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the entire Canadian political class has basically been caught on the back foot with this Trump tariff threat. There's been, I don't think, a very coherent response. There have been kind of different responses, both from the federal government and from various premiers who have a lot of power in Canada. The provinces are quite powerful. And they've kind of oscillated between trying to meet fire with fire, as it were, and kind of saying, well, if Trump, does this tariff, this new tariff, we'll do tariffs of our own. We'll start a trade war, and going back and forth between that and Trump has legitimate, the Americans have legitimate concerns. We're going to fund the border better. We're going to do this or that, et cetera, et cetera. The federal government's response, I think, has been similarly a little bit confused, and I don't know. There probably is a fair amount of political capital Trudeau might have gained. I mean, this is just speculative, but by kind of meeting Trump's tariff threat in a more nationalist way. But I think the fact that he didn't, I mean, it could just be a reflection of his lack of political judgment, or as you suggest, it could also just be because his own position is incredibly weak right now.
And can you give people a sense of Trudeau's history as the leader of the Liberals in Canada, his tenures as prime minister, and really, I guess, what led to this moment where he had a high 60 or mid 60 approval rating, I think, at his apex, and now he's really at quite a low. I mean, I think I saw something like 28% in a Vox article that I read.
Yeah, well, in 2015, Trudeau led the Liberals to this big majority government, and he led them there from actually a historic low. They were, for the first time in their history, in third place. I mean, they got absolutely decimated in the 2011 federal election. So Trudeau led them back to power, and I would say between kind of November of 2015, when he won the election, and maybe some way through 2017, he really was able to, maintain his popularity, I think, with a strong assist from the U.S. media and the global media more generally, because he became this sort of de facto anti-Trump resistance figure. And he didn't actually have to do a great deal in order to have that mantle, but it was something that, was kind of assigned to him, and it worked very well. But in 2019 and 2021, the last two times there have been federal elections, the Liberals have won in terms of winning the most seats, but they've actually lost the popular vote on both of those occasions to pretty replacement level Tory leaders. I won't bore your viewers by explaining who Andrew Scheer and Erin O'Toole are, but suffice it to say, these are not heavyweight politicians. They're very kind of bland and generic center-right figures. And in 2021, I mean, I think this is really where we might begin the story up to the current moment. The Liberals Trudeau calls a federal election and really tries to set it up as this, the most important election since 1945, that kind of thing. So he's calling the election early, he's seeking a mandate. And that election goes very badly. Basically, very few people care that there's an election. There's almost no net change in terms of seats. And so the Liberals ended up exactly where they were before, more or less, which is that they're relying on other parties in the House of Commons to maintain themselves. And they've been able to do that throughout the past several years, partly by entering into this confidence and supply arrangement with the NDP, which is the Social Democratic Party and currently the fourth largest party in Parliament. So the NDP entered into this agreement in exchange for a number of concessions, expansion of public dental care, expansion of pharmaceutical coverage, anti-scab legislation in federally regulated industries, things like that. The NDP pulled out of the deal in September, so a year early. And that's made the government look even more precarious. And so, I mean, that's kind of really what brought us to the present. But I think over the past couple of years, the cost of living crisis in Canada has only gotten worse. And the government really hasn't, Trudeau has not really had, I think, any significant response to it. There's actually, I think, a very direct parallel, or a number of direct parallels one could draw with Joe Biden here.
Right.
In terms of, outstaying, a Liberal politician very much outstaying their welcome, remaining in place despite the fact that they're dragging their own party down quite visibly. But also, I think in terms of just being very disconnected from the actual sources of national discontent. Trudeau, like Biden, I think, largely thinks that his standing in the polls is like a problem of morale. Basically thinks the economy is more or less doing fine. And, it's just people's perceptions of it that are wrong or something like that. Very similar to the kinds of things we saw leading up to the US election in a lot of liberal circles. So I really think where we're at now is just a reflection of the government has been out of gas for a long time, and its front man is a really unpopular figure whose position has been untenable for quite a while.
And it appears like the Conservatives winning in the elections next year is all but an inevitability, basically, based on his lack of popularity. Can you speak to that and how they're maybe approaching their kind of criticisms of Trudeau that may be breaking through?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, the Tories have had a lead in the polls for, at least 2 years now, possibly longer. And the lead's quite significant at this point. I mean, we're talking about a double-digit lead, so more than enough to secure a majority government. The big change in the Conservative Party really came in 2022 when they elected Pierre Poilievre as their new leader. Poilievre, I think, is partly, he's doing well partly just because the government's quite unpopular, and the Conservatives, and Liberals have historically just kind of traded places as the two ruling parties in Canada. And so when one gets unpopular, the other tends to just, in a very general way, I think, reap some of the benefits of their opponents' unpopularity. But Pierre Poilievre is kind of an unusual figure. He's both unusual and utterly generic. He's utterly generic in the sense that he's a pure creature of the Canadian conservative movement, but he is also, somebody who's, I guess, connected to some of the weirder parts of conservatism, the extremely online parts. When he was running for the Tory leadership, he liked to do campaign events where he would buy shawarma with Bitcoin, that sort of thing. So I wouldn't say those things have helped his popularity, but he's also talked a lot about just the cost of living crisis in a very bread and butter way that isn't exactly as ideologically coded. And I think to a lot of people sounds kind of vaguely anti-establishment. So he's attacked the Bank of Canada a fair bit over inflation. It's not clear. He said he would fire the governor of the Bank of Canada. It's not really clear to me if Poilievre had been prime minister. I suspect the Bank of Canada would have pursued exactly the same, jacking up interest rates policy. But that stuff has worked fairly well for him. He's a performer. He has used the House of Commons to generate YouTube content. And all of that has worked very well in a context where the Liberals don't really have a narrative of their own, and Justin Trudeau is so incredibly unpopular. There's so many through lines here, frankly, with some of this conservative faux populism that we're seeing.
It's almost as if it's this embrace of a direct communication style, even if that you're saying a bunch of BS when you're communicating. And also this almost anarcho-capitalist, Javier Milei thing, embracing of speculation in Bitcoin, and almost anti-society, just this libertarianism that feels like it's also very relevant here.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And another part of that, which is I think worked very well for Poilievre, is just he's shown a willingness to talk in ways that I don't know. In my experience, anyway, conservatives in both Canada and the United States and elsewhere have, up until a few years ago, they didn't like to talk about workers directly. I think they would have seen that as kind of uncouth, and maybe someone like Poilievre would have even seen that as sort of communistic, to talk about workers. But he started doing that, and I think it's worked very well. One of the big question marks right now is what a Poilievre government would actually do. because some of the things that he's endorsed in the past are extremely radical. I mean, he's still officially committed to defunding Canada's public broadcaster, the CBC. He's, talked about, I mean, this is probably 10 years ago now or so. He's talked about bringing right to work laws to Canada, that sort of thing. But right now, the Conservatives don't have much of a positive program they're offering. They have, facts about the cost of living crisis, facts about food bank usage, that sort of thing. They're talking about addressing the housing crisis by, getting housing built, presumably by cutting regulations and giving tax breaks to developers, that kind of thing. But yeah, in terms of how radical they would go and whether they would actually go in a sort of Javier Milei direction, it's not clear to me yet.
And I guess in terms of the political ambitions of other liberals, right? Is there any kind of sense that, or perhaps it's better to talk about the New Democratic Party and their role in this? Has that leadership been effective at pushing Trudeau in any way? Is there a reckoning happening within that party? Because as you say, they got some concessions, but it doesn't necessarily seem to be addressing like how expensive housing is, for example.
Well, there were some housing items in that deal as well. The deal's pretty extensive, and people can read it online if they're interested. And there's also different parts of it have gotten finished or not finished to varying degrees. I mean, I think that the strategic bind that the New Democratic Party finds itself in really has to do with there's a difficult dance that Jagmeet Singh, the leader, has to perform now because on the one hand, he is trying to oppose the government in all kinds of areas, but he has also, been in this agreement with them until it was just in September that he pulled out of the deal, and so now he's calling for Trudeau personally to go, but it's not clear how the NDP would vote if there was a no confidence motion to bring down the government when Parliament resumes at the end of January. So it's a difficult dance. My sense, and I'm just speculating here, is that when the NDP negotiated that deal with the Liberals, there was partly a strategic calculation. The party wanted these things, these concessions, but there was also a strategic calculation that the deal might benefit the NDP electorally. And so far, that doesn't seem to have been the case because, the Conservatives were very good at associating the NDP with the Liberals. And so I think that is the principal kind of strategic dilemma for Canada's Social Democratic Party at the moment.
And lastly, I guess, what's your do you think Trudeau steps aside, or do you think he kind of holds on through the elections? And will there be internal pressure by the Liberals because they're worried about their chances with a guy at the top of the ticket who's not even cracking 30% approval in some polls?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. I mean, there are no really formal mechanisms. I mean, especially now that Parliament's not sitting, there's no formal way that Trudeau could be ousted. And honestly, even if Parliament were sitting, Canada is not like Australia or Britain in terms of parties or Parliament having these built-in internal mechanisms for ousting a sitting prime minister. So really, the only pressure that can be brought to bear on Trudeau from his own party is kind of signing open letters and MPs talking to the media and that sort of thing. So the ball really is in his court, and I wouldn't want to be too confident in any particular prediction about what he's going to do. I mean, in theory, he's on holiday now and he's thinking about it. He's canceled all of his end of the year interviews with the big networks and stuff. So we have no idea what he's thinking at the moment. But I will say that nothing that Trudeau has done or said so far has indicated to me that he, he doesn't want to step aside, and he's every part of his political identity is telling him not to step aside. And so, even if that means, he goes into next year with a 20% approval rating, unless something changes or there's a significant escalation and pressure to get him out of there, I'm not sure he can be moved.
Well, Luke Savage, really appreciate your time today explaining what is happening over there up north. Where can people find your work?
Best place to find me is at Luke W. Savage on the artist formerly known as Twitter. You can find me there.
I refuse to use the other name, so I appreciate you also having that proclivity. Thanks so much, Luke. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, Emma.
All right, guys, quick break. As you can tell, my resolution's a little off, so we're going to just reset my camera, and then we'll be right back talking with Jeff Stein. We are back, and we are joined now by my friend Jeff Stein of the Washington Post, whose series in the Washington Post, the White House economics reporter for them, is entitled The Money War, examining the impact of U.S. sanctions on the rest of the world. Jeff, I wish we could sanction the New York Rangers. How are you doing today?
I mean, nothing seems to be working, so permanent financial exclusion for Chris Jury.
That would be nice. For Jeff and I are big New York Rangers fans. We have our, I don't know, you're a part of that small little community on Twitter where we talk about them. But yeah, they're the
overlap between newspaper dorks and Rangers fans is like me and two other people.
I know. It's also, there's another Washington Post.
Ishan. Yeah.
Ishan, right. Super Rangers fan. But yeah, going from being in the Eastern Conference Finals to being one of the worst teams in the league this year, we're not having a good time, Jeff.
It's brutal. A few years ago when the Caps won the Stanley Cup, I managed to sneak some Rangers apparel into the room where it was being showed off to the Washington Post staff, which didn't really endear me to anyone. As you can know.
Well, I mean, at the very least, your work on this front should, because this, how many parts do you have right now to the series? It really is phenomenal.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate that. We've done, I guess, 8 or 9 stories at this point. It's been a year and a half of journalism. I have my notebook on this is now about 1,200 pages of notes. I've interviewed hundreds of people, went to Guatemala. We had a reporter work from Ukraine in the front lines. We had a lawsuit that we filed after a Freedom of Information request was denied. So we took the government to court. Justice Department lost and was forced to divulge, at least thus far, over 1,300 pages of previously undisclosed records. Talked to basically everyone in sort of the sanction space, people in the government, people outside the government. Humanitarian workers, people in Cuba, people in Venezuela, people in Guatemala and Paraguay. And so the breadth of this thing is remarkable. And it really felt like one of those stories where the more you dig, the sort of deeper the hole gets, and the scale of the impact, the fact that so few people know about it, and sort of the unintended consequences of this key prong of U.S. foreign policy going back 20 years or so has been, just a very rewarding bit of reporting to do. And really excited to discuss it.
So, it's phenomenal and very well researched. And when I guess we should start at the beginning here about sanctions, how the United States began to deploy them in the manner that they do now. We have this graph that you have in your piece on how much sanctions have proliferated in recent years. And you can see on the screen, if people are watching, the dark red are the numbers of entities that are unsanctioned by our government, and the lighter red represents the number of entities sanctioned. And you can see how since your graph begins in 1995, they have escalated under, Bush and Obama, it was relatively similar, but particularly under Trump and then Biden, sanctions exploded. And now something like 15,000 individuals, businesses, governments are subject of United States sanctions. I guess if you could talk about what sanctions really are, how they are applied, and what accounts for that explosion, just to get us started.
Yeah, no, happy to. So I think a really good big picture frame for people to wrap their heads around this sort of phenomenon is after Iraq and Afghanistan, where Bush obviously was dealt very serious political headwinds from sort of the catastrophes of the wars. There was a move among sort of successive U.S. presidents to not retrench and pull back America's footprint in the world, but to do so in a way that was more politically palatable. And obviously, I'm not trying to suggest that the U.S. has stopped using military force abroad. We all know that that's not true. But what is true is that we have not really seen the kind of large-scale deployments of troops on the ground the way we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11. And yet, as I mentioned, U.S. presidents still continue to want to influence affairs abroad. And so economic restrictions, economic penalties have really filled that gap because, as we can discuss, sanctions do not require an act of Congress. The president has almost unchecked unilateral power to impose sanctions on whoever he deems and his administration deems to be a national security threat. They don't cost any money. Like, unlike the military, which you do have to say, hey, Congress, can you approve this budget? Sanctions don't require any new government spending. You just basically, and we can get into the nerdy mechanics if you're interested, but you just basically say, this person is a threat to the US government. The world financial system cannot deal with them. And this person, this country, this bank, this entity, whatever, this nonprofit, this sector within the country. And so therefore they are basically persona non grata. And I think the motivation behind some of the reporting was to say, on the surface, this seems like a good thing. And maybe in a lot of ways it is, that we're resorting to these kinds of measures much more than the military invasions that Iraq and Afghanistan. But what are the downstream consequences? Let me just quickly read for you something. Here is a partial list of countries that are under some form of U.S. economic sanctions: Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Syria, Cuba, Yemen, Afghanistan, Russia, China, Burma, Libya, Sudan, Belarus, Lebanon, Mali, Ethiopia, Paraguay, Zimbabwe, Nicaragua, Somalia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Our analysis found that as much as a third of all countries in the world and 60% of all poor countries are under some form of economic sanctions. And so we wanted to understand, how that happened and what the effects are.
And this graph that you also included is also really relevant to that, Bradley. The second graph that I sent you, how you can see how they developed over time. And you rattled off that list of all the countries there, but as the number of sanctions exploded again in the past 10 years or so, you can see how the sanctions that used to be more focused on Central America, and we can talk about how the Cold War and those remnants play into this, but now it's exploded across the rest of the world, specifically in Asia, and you can see that as it relates to Russia and how those sanctions spiked, but Trump was really bullish on sanctioning Iran as well. So when you talk about the political elements of this, the drone war also, I think, fits in with this idea where the political cost of a drone assassinating a bunch of people abroad or killing folks, and Obama increased the drone war and then Trump increased it over Obama. Biden actually cut into that, and he's been more bullish on sanctions, as you can see. But the idea that we want to continue our imperialism abroad, but we don't necessarily want the public to have input in it, and this creates a bit of a shield from our impact. Like, that seems to be a lot of the focus, and you can see how that runs into conflict in terms of like how the American public and many activists have responded to our funding of Israel right now, right? Like, there's a rub there, even though obviously there's all these different kind of mechanisms to prevent the public from having input on our foreign policy.
I think you put your finger on something very perceptive about sort of the geographic shift in the use of sanctions, because to me, what that really reflects is a changing understanding of, as this tool has become more and more heavily used, its deployment has really shifted from really, 20, 30 years ago, sanctions were primarily a tool used to go after sort of and push around smaller, less powerful, less significant countries. As you mentioned, Latin America, Cuba is obviously sort of the paradigmatic example of sanctions, North Korea, Iran. These are kind of rogue states, if you will, countries that are not sort of strategically significant in geopolitics and the global economy. But as sanctions have become more and more the sort of tool of first and last resort for the US government, we've seen a shift into what we have now, which is presidents using them as their central tool against Russia when they invade Ukraine, against China over threats over the South Pacific Sea, against sort of the major players that the US is trying to deal with. And some people will say, that reflects a lack of imagination, a lack of creativity, an inability to look at diplomacy and other tools and say, this is something that's easy to do. This is something we can impose cost-free. Let's just put them on across the board. And at the maximum, it will hurt someone abroad, and we won't see any reverberations, domestically from it.
And can you elaborate on that point about how it hinders diplomacy? You had a quote from a former official in the Commerce Department in one of the pieces in this series saying, "It is the only thing between diplomacy and war, and as such has become the most important foreign policy tool in the U.S. arsenal, and yet nobody in government is sure this whole strategy is even working." If you could explain how that middle ground there that has now become so dominant prevents the United States from engaging in good faith talks, where it's just another form of us using our massive power. It's like a military invasion would be using the fact that we have the largest military in the world by many times over, but we're also the financial center of the world in many ways, although, of course, China is challenging that. We're using the weight of our economic influence as brute force, but in a different manner, as opposed to diplomacy, talking to people, making deals, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think this gets to a really core part of the reporting, because, you look at those charts, like anyone looks at those charts and is like, what is happening here? Like, what is going on with this, like this vertiginous increase in the application of this tool? And when I was beginning to work on this story, I kind of, as a reporter, like, you get all the critics and you talk to all of them first, then you take them to the government and you say, so like, what's your response to this issue? And you interview government sources and you say, like, can you defend this trend? And what I was really surprised by, frankly, in the course of my reporting was senior administration officials would say, like, Jeff, like, you're completely right. Like, this trend we think has gotten out of hand, and we think that we are overusing this tool and then it's becoming less effective, which, you know, is like the best thing ever when, as a reporter, when someone's like, yeah, like you're right. Like the person that you expect to be defensive is like, actually, you're right, is a very rewarding moment. But more importantly, I think like was revealing for the fact that the government itself, the challenge is that if you're an official in the State Department or the Treasury Department, and someone comes to you and says, there's this corrupt leader in African country X, or in Ukrainians are asking for help, or like there are legitimate non-US cause foreign policy crises all over the world, you know, like every day something terrible happens somewhere. And it is, I think, genuinely hard for people who like grow up with the mindset, like I'm going to go help people. Like, that's why I'm going to work in the State Department.
Right.
For them to like be barraged by human rights groups and like, you know, repressed minorities in Africa and all these things, and to say like, no, you know, like I'm not going to help you. Or maybe I'll just ask politely. I'll try to do the thing diplomatically. So there is this like this force that makes this trend really hard for people to resist on the individual level, even if they sort of collectively realize that the system is flawed or broken, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And I guess if do you mind expanding a little bit on the impact of sanctions on other parts of the world, and how, you know, frankly, I would say that our sanctions regime has been in many ways an effort to create regime change in areas of the world that we want more influence in. I mean, sometimes Venezuela, that's been the case. Iran, obviously, we've been heavily sanctioning them for quite a while. What is that impact on the people in those countries? And does it cause those governments to turn to, say, alternative economic relationships, like, say, with China or with Russia, in a way where it's like, are we going too far and incentivizing a push away from any collaboration with the United States economically, the more and more nations that we sanction?
I think this is the most important question about this whole field. What are the humanitarian consequences? How many innocent people are we hurting with this, with our penalties? We've done a lot of reporting on this. I'll just quickly mention two things. One is we were able to reveal for the first time that DHS, the Department of Homeland Security under Trump, had written confidential government analyses saying that sanctions on Venezuela risked exacerbating the outmigration that we saw. We saw basically the Venezuelan economy imploded at a historic level. We saw Venezuela's economy contract by more than any other country in peacetime, and by many countries at war. Venezuela's economy under heavy sanctions contracted more than Iraq after 2003, after Ukraine during the Russian invasion, more than Zimbabwe when its currency was collapsing. So these are huge impacts. And some research suggests that about half of the Venezuelan economic collapse was caused by U.S. sanctions in particular. And at a time when everyone in U.S. politics was like, what's the deal with all of these people coming across the border? We had ourselves exacerbated that problem with economic penalties that hurt the Venezuelan economy. The other thing I'll just mention quickly on the humanitarian front, some of the sanctions are targeted, by which I mean they only hit specific companies or specific people or specific nonprofits or networks. And one example of that we discovered was that the U.S. sanctioned 2 mining companies in Guatemala. It's something that almost no one had paid any attention to before we wrote about it. And I went down to like Northeast Guatemala. It's one of the poorest places in the world. And these mining companies were not great. Like it's not someone that like you or I would want to work for. They were not like commendable employees by a lot of metrics.
Right.
But the U.S. move to close them and shut them down, which was successful, plunged this already desperately poor part of the world into true economic misery. I mean, unemployment surged, malnutrition surged. People I talked to on the street were hungry, hadn't eaten. They, in many cases, had tried migrating to the U.S. Some of them had died migrating to the U.S. after the U.S. closed down their companies. And so, like, I've seen firsthand what these things can do, and they're very powerful, and it's like incredible because you're in this 6-hour drive from Guatemala City in these like northeast mountain hinterlands, and you're talking to people who are like, what's the deal with the U.S. Treasury sanctions? And it's an incredible thing because you're like, nobody at Treasury knows who you people are. Like it's this incredible asymmetry. Go
on, Jeff.
No, sorry, I'm very long-winded on these things.
No. It's just important to recognize that impact because, to be honest, the morality of the claims of like who we're sanctioning is a little bit undercut by everything else that we do, right? Like, I mean, the Biden administration has not followed through on sanctions, even of these individual extremist settlers in the West Bank. Like, some of those were retracted. And so when it's selectively deployed with countries that we have an adversarial relationship with, and then we're trying to make these humanitarian cases because of X company being exploitative, I mean, frankly, it's ridiculous that we have no standing to make that case. And so at the end of the day, it's really about punishing people that don't kind of fall in line with the United States.
Yeah, and just on the humanitarian front, just one last thing. The Biden administration, maybe, some people would say to their credit, has gotten much more aggressive about issuing humanitarian licenses, which say, okay, we've sanctioned Syria, but here is a license that says if you are shipping, food or medicine or equipment to rebuild their electrical grid, you have a license that circumvents the sanctions. That they will say that, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is that if you're a bank, if you're a major Wall Street bank, for instance, and you send a good, you facilitate a transaction between a Syrian company and a Western company, and it turns out that Syrian company was not actually going to use the thing, the import for what they said they would, and it goes towards, they sell it to a terrorist group or they're actually purchasing something else. That bank is now subject to crippling fines, tens of millions of dollars of fines from the U.S. government. So the banks are saying, no, I'm not going to touch this no matter what your license says. I'm not taking that risk. And so it's this, I think, really telling example of the gap between sort of the aspiration of the government to say we're carving out these humanitarian exemptions and the reality, which is that for humanitarian groups, they still can't get these supplies in because the banks are not willing to facilitate those transactions.
Because of the risk.
Exactly. It's called de-risking. It's a huge problem, and it some of the humanitarian groups will say it makes a mockery of the pretensions to be doing this in a way that exempts civilian populations. I also liked your other question about sort of the selective deployment. One of the stories in the series, we spent months looking at sort of these records that the Justice Department has to keep of lobbyists who are working for foreign entities. Mm. And what these records showed was a huge increase in lobbying on sanctions. And these guys who work in the Treasury Department and work in DOJ on sanctions, you would not believe how much money is in this. I mean, I guess it makes sense in a lot of ways, right?
I wrote this down, that the lobbying on sanctions, you wrote in your piece, sanctions-related lobbying surged just from $6 million in 2014 to $31 million in the last publicly available records in 2022. And that's
that's a huge
less than 20 years.
That's a tiny window into what's actually happening because a lot of these things don't get recorded as sanctions lobbying.
Exactly.
A lot of the disclosures don't get made at all. There's this we wrote about this a little bit, but there's this thing that a lot of people consider to be a huge loophole where if you're doing legal defense of a sanctioned party or entity, it does not have to be disclosed. So what's the difference between legal defense and lobbying? If you don't want to disclose it, you can say it's legal defense, and then you don't have to tell the public that you are a former Justice Department official who's now being paid millions of dollars by some, foreign dictator to lobby your buddies and say, hey, can you cut this guy a break? And oh, by the way, we have an opening next year if you're thinking about retiring. In one case, we found the exact number is escaping me, but it was something like $70 or $80 million has been paid to one lobbying firm set up by former Treasury officials from the entities linked to the United Arab Emirates, which is, I mean, I don't have to tell you, like a lot more than you can make in the government. I'm going to just triple check that number so I don't get sued for mischaracterizing it to you.
Yeah.
Don't be like ABC.
Yeah, right. That's true.
Yeah, exactly.
But as you look it up, it's going to be a high figure, I imagine. And also just we were just talking earlier about how members of Congress should probably get paid more, and that Republicans are using that as like a way to just be like, hey, we're populist, but we're actually going to continue to incentivize our lawmakers from getting money from private sources. This is an extension of that here.
Yeah, more than $75 million to one firm.
Oof.
So I mean, it's probably getting close to what you guys pull in here. Anyway.
Well, the Soros money does keep us well fed. I guess so. Like, lastly, when we're talking about this sanctions regime here, you also had another part of this story that was, I think, something people may not know about. That when we sanction individual people like this particular Russian billionaire, Viktor Vekselberg, I think that's his name, that we seized his super yacht, which is like worth $90 million. But when we do that via sanctions, the taxpayers are paying right now for the upkeep of the super yacht that was seized. If you could just tell people about how that works as it relates to like sanctions once, we take a step or an action like that against a Russian oligarch billionaire type.
Yeah, in April 2022, right after Ukraine was invaded, President Biden had this big address where he said, look, we're going to go after Russian oligarchs who keep their money in the West, and we are going to take their, quote, ill-begotten gains. And on paper, like many things in the sanctions world, that sounds, like something a lot of people can get behind. The reality, though, has been that of the oligarch assets seized through this effort, only $6 million with an M dollars have gone to Ukraine, which is just by comparison, U.S. taxpayers have spent over $170 billion on Ukraine. So this has produced a tiny amount. And furthermore, as you're saying, Emma, actually the story we had today was about another yacht named the Amadea. We actually don't know, the one you brought up, we don't know how much they're spending on that, which is something that, you might think the government would have to disclose to the press after repeated questions, but they have not. But we did sue the government and did get these records over how much they're spending on the Amadea, this other yacht. And they show that we've spent about $30 million. Taxpayers have spent almost $30 million on maintaining this yacht, because even though the oligarch who owns it has been sanctioned, that doesn't give the U.S. permission to just liquidate it right away. You have to get a court order to approve that sale. And there's questions now about whether that yacht was actually owned by that guy or owned by someone else. And so what seemed like a very simple thing to punish allies of Putin has become a sort of significant taxpayer expense. And Elon Musk actually tweeted at me today to ask more about the story. So we'll see if Doge is going to take a look at this.
Well, I have him muted, and honestly, it's made my life a lot better. So, but we'll see. I mean, I have some skepticism about his sincerity about cutting government spending, particularly as it relates to the Department of Defense and the contracts that he receives. That's a whole nother bag.
Well, and they're also looking at, $4 to $6 or $7 trillion of tax cuts. So you put that against a few $1 billion here or there. So, the scale here will be interesting to keep an eye on.
Well, Jeff, really appreciate your time today, and everybody should check out the full series at the Washington Post. I mean, really, just as an aside, the fact that like there had been some people who unsubscribed based on the fact that the editorial board reversed its decision on the Harris endorsement. I just wanted to say, and I still think that the Washington Post, you guys have so many really good journalists there that are doing phenomenal work, and I still subscribe and want to support your journalism, and I think people should too. So thanks so much, Jeff. Yeah, really appreciate it. We don't need more journalists punished by billionaires and their decisions. So thanks so much, Jeff.
No comment, but yeah, thanks. Bye, Emma.
Bye. All right, guys. With that, we're going to wrap up the first hour of this program, head into the fun half, where we will read your IMs, take your calls, play some clips, probably go into this deep dive Wall Street Journal piece on Biden's mental acuity, and more. Well, no, that's not what I'm plugging right now. ESPN's for later.
YouTube.com.
You can find this at youtube.com. The Tube, on the Tube for you. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning, we had Matt Sitman on of Know Your Enemy to talk about Trump's victory. And I also talked about AI and kind of what I think AI is going to be. I don't want to rehash it all, but basically it's not going to be, super intelligence that can be your therapist and girlfriend. It's what these companies are competing for is to be the next Google, which is to have the platform that people go to that has all the access to the information that and they can serve it to you. And that's really what this competition is. So they want to get access to all this other data because if they don't have access to it, they can't serve it to you faster. Anyway, check that out, patreon.com/leftreckoning.
And on ESPN today, we will be giving our picks against the spread, the final of the year. Check it out, although we will post the other picks so we keep up with our competition, youtube.com/ESPN show. Also, shop.majorityreportradio.com. A reminder, limited edition and Majority Report hats are there. The limited edition mugs, like the one I'm drinking out of, they're available once again. The 20th anniversary mugs, but we have the EmMajority Report. Oh, wait, they're sold out. I just saw they're sold out.
Oh, wow. Well, Bradley, if you want to go over to leftreckoning.com/store, some things that aren't sold out for people still shopping, left out in the cold by our lack of, supply chain here. The Left Reckoning hats are available, along with we had the, I forget the Left Reckoning flaming text, I believe, it was a tank top. But yeah, you can go to leftreckoning.com/store. We got all this fun stuff here.
I like the black one a lot.
Yeah, the black hat's cool. And the Fence Cutter T-shirt, which is very nice quality shirt, and some tank tops and stuff.
Very nice.
So,
yeah,
check that out. Leftreckoning.com/store.
All right, guys. Charlie Jerk writes in, "Damn, Emma, the Tube for you. How has Google not hired you as a copywriter? I'm not sure. The Tube for you." All right, guys. 646-257-3920. We'll open up the phone lines on the other half of the fun half. See you there.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the Majority Report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
Yeah, I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No. I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
What?
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Was offered a tour, sushi, and
that's what we call it in the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. You shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Tour,
Wow.
Sushi.
I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind.
So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour,